Right. Good evening, and thank you all for joining us for this launch of Curriculum as Lived, Currere, Mindfulness and Nonviolent Companionship, a new book in the Lived Experience, Nonviolence and Curriculum Studies series. I'm the collection co-editor, Jo Flory, joining from Tulsa, Oklahoma, along with editor Dr. Hanyu Wong, professor of curriculum studies at Oklahoma State University. And I'd like to start off by thanking Dr. Wong for being such a generous editor and supporting us all so well in this work. Our format for the evening is focused on our panelists, all contributors to this wonderful collection who incorporate nonviolence education into a broad range of subjects and grade levels. They will each present for a few minutes on their pieces, after which I'll open the floor to questions and comments. Please note that we're being recorded, so unless you're speaking, please mute your devices. So some of the themes that intersect across this collection include the transformation that emerges from developing a nonviolent relationship with self, the interconnection of that self-compassion with compassion for others, the intersection of spirituality and contemplative practices, and the ways those practices connect to healing. These come through in the work of each of our panelists, reminding us of the meaningful work of nonviolence education that connects the personal and professional, and presents good ways to deal with the stress of these turbulent times. So at this time, I'd like to introduce our panelists, beginning with Dr. Vanessa Jones. Dr. Jones serves as head of the primary school at Holland Hall in Tulsa. She's a passionate educator, researcher, and advocate for nonviolence education, whose work in curriculum studies explores how mindfulness and self-compassion contribute to a more just and peaceful approach to leadership and pedagogy. Samantha Lancaster is a doctoral candidate in the curriculum studies program at OSU. Informed by her background in school counseling and mental health, her work focuses on providing time for students to tell their stories and in order to foster safe spaces for learning. Dr. Chez Redmond is the Senior Director of the TRIO Student Support Services Grants at the University of Central Oklahoma. And she oversees programs serving first-generation college students there. Dr. Redmond advocates for practical mindfulness techniques to support the mental health and well-being of students, staff, and faculty in higher education spaces. Kim Skarns is a doctoral candidate in social foundations at OSU. Her academic interests include nonviolence and relationality, and they're informed by a belief that in the empowerment of teachers and students through reflection, collaboration, and human-centered connection. And Dr. Chelsea Walters, is a graduate of the Curriculum Studies doctoral program at Oklahoma State University, a scholar of reading education, English, and language arts curriculum. Her research interests include literacy education and K-12 education in rural communities. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Vanessa Jones for our first panelist.
Thank you so much, Jo, and it's wonderful to see so many familiar faces here this evening. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for being here to celebrate the launch of this book and the work of the many and talented contributors who helped bring this important work into the world. When I began writing my chapter, which is titled Cultivating Inner Peace, A Journey of Mindfulness and Nonviolent Transformation, I was interested in exploring how educators come to understand and practice nonviolence in their professional lives. Much of the scholarship around nonviolence focuses on social movements and interpersonal relationships, but I found myself increasingly drawn to a quieter dimension of this work, the relationship we have with ourselves. Through the process of writing and reflecting on my own experiences as a student, teacher, and school leader, I began to see that practicing nonviolence in schools often begins internally. Before we can cultivate compassion, patience, and dignity in our classrooms and communities, we must learn to extend those same qualities towards ourselves. Education, and especially school leadership, is a profession that invites constant reflection. We make decisions every day that affect students, families, and colleagues. Inevitably, some of those decisions will be imperfect. When this happens, it's easy to fall into a cycle of self-critique, replaying conversations, second-guessing choices, or measuring ourselves against an imagined standard of perfection. In my chapter, I reflect on moments when that internal dialogue became particularly visible to me. So here's just a little excerpt from my chapter. Our first long-lasting and most intimate relationship is with ourselves, and we must tap into our potential to cultivate a nonviolent relationship with ourselves. I don't think we can do much work externally on nonviolence before we first have nonviolence within ourselves. In my lived experience, the violence I had with myself was embedded in not being able to forgive myself and dissolve the feelings of guilt and shame. Others likely have different specific needs, but I believe most people face the task of achieving self-forgiveness for what they did not do wrong. For me, forgiveness and nonviolence are intimately related. That moment helped me realize that practicing nonviolence is not only about how we treat others, it is also about how we respond to ourselves in moments of uncertainty, vulnerability, and imperfection. A nonviolent relationship with self invites us to replace judgment with curiosity, criticism with reflection, and perfectionism with growth. It asks us to recognize that learning, whether for students or educators, is always an unfinished process. Over time, I've come to see how this internal practice shapes leadership. When leaders cultivate a nonviolent relationship with themselves, they are more likely to extend that same posture towards others. They listen more carefully, they respond with patience rather than defensiveness, and they create environments where people feel safe enough to take risks, to make mistakes, and to grow. In schools, this matters deeply. Young people are learning not only academic content, but also how to be human with one another. When educators model reflection, humility, and compassion, including compassion for ourselves, we show students that dignity can remain intact even in moments of struggle. Ultimately, my chapter suggests that nonviolence in education is not simply something we teach as a concept. It is something we practice moment by moment through reflection, relationships, and a commitment to honoring the humanity of both others and ourselves. Thank you so much for letting me share a little bit of my story.
All right, and next we'll hear from Samantha Lancaster.
In the fall of 2023, I spent a beautiful Oklahoma afternoon visiting Muskogee Creek sites and looking for traces of Indigenous presence in Tulsa. A classmate of mine, Clint Sago, came as a visitor to one of my classes and introduced us to 5 Muskogee Creek sites within the city limits of Tulsa. He shared his experiences of a bike ride that took him and others to these Indigenous spaces. I followed his suggestions to visit these places: Council Oak Park, Woodward Park, Zinc Park, Perryman Cemetery, and the former site of Muskogee Chief Tuckabatchee's cabin, which was located at the Gathering Place in Tulsa. I never did find Tuckabatchee's cabin, and when I asked around, no one really knew what I was talking about. So that space that Indigenous space has been completely erased. These places have stories to tell, but as I visited all 5 of them, it was difficult to find historical markers and descriptions on the sites, which speaks to how poorly we acknowledge the Indigenous nature of the city of Tulsa. During each visit, I took time to engage in new thought-provoking learning. I was also enrolled in a place-based education course, and I knew that I wanted to be a visitor at each site and not just a tourist. My goal was to engage in experiential learning while visiting these spaces. I wanted to spend time at each place in contemplation as to how I, as a white non-Indigenous educator, could better serve my Indigenous students and serve them as an ally, include their cultural perspectives in learning, and counteract colonial settler curriculum. So I'm going to share some of my experiences, some of the places I visited. So this image is the Osage Ballerinas, and they're located at Woodward Park near downtown Tulsa. Woodward Park was a WPA project for the city of Tulsa, and it created a beautiful city park. But the space was originally the land allotment belonging to Helen Woodward. She was a minor at the time the land was sold without her consent. So she sued the city later on to try and get her land back, but the case was dismissed because she did not file her suit within a 2-year time span, which was required by law. She lost her land to the city of Tulsa. This space is Council Oak Park. This is the site where the Muskogee Creek peoples met after they came to Indian territory after their forest removal due to the Indian Removal Act. They arrived in the area from the southern United States. And what was really, one of the really nice components about this space is there are plants that were indigenous to the original home of the Muskogee Creek. They brought these plants with them on their journey from the south. The Perryman Cemetery is a tiny, tiny space tucked away in a neighborhood near downtown Tulsa, and it is reported to be the oldest cemetery in Tulsa. The cemetery was once the land allotment of George Perryman, who was the brother of the Muskogee Principal Chief Legis, who was interred here. His grave was previously unmarked, but now it is honored by a great white obelisk. Also buried in the Perryman Cemetery is Josiah Perryman, who was Tulsa's first postmaster, and Rachel Perryman, who was a Trail of Tears survivor. Also, in the Perryman Cemetery were these little white houses that covered many of the graves, along with the markers showing this hand clasp. The Perrymans were a very wealthy Muskogee Creek family. They had a land allotment that was 60,000 acres. They ran a ranch there that had 3,000 head of cattle. Their allotment has been diminished to that small Perryman Cemetery and a neighborhood park. But the neighborhood park is named after a wealthy white family prominent in Tulsa. The name of the family is Zink, so this is Zink Park. Once upon a time, the Perrymans had a general store in this space. And although, I don't know and can't confirm that these steps were that led to the Perryman store, but possibly they did. So those were the places that I visited when I was in Tulsa, gathering and lingering. And something that I recalled while I was visiting these places was I used to teach a Perryman family, had a high population of Indigenous Creek students, and one of those families was Perryman. So it just the experience just brought it all home and made it kind of a complete circle for me.
All right, thank you. And our next presenter is Dr. Chez Redmond.
Thank you. And thank you, Samantha, for sharing that story with us. That I really love that. And to talk a little bit and add to that conversation, my chapter talks about the gift of mindfulness and particularly a student affairs journey. I'm a student affairs staff person, and my experience is one that has continued on until this day. And I open up the chapter with a quote that says, "Mindfulness does not reject experience, it lets experience be the teacher." And it has taught me so much to have this experience. And so in the chapter, it talks about how mindfulness shifted as a tool for me to help students to transform me as a practitioner and how I connect with others. So I've taken this topic of mindfulness, incorporated it into my practice, but I also looked at it in my dissertation research. And what I looked at, which is common today, is that professionals, we're living a fast-paced life, and it is emotionally demanding still. This research was in 2022, but still, right? There's constant deadlines, there's student needs, there's these meetings, and what happens is we tend to ignore our personal needs, the space that we need, and that impacts how we connect with students, with each other, and it ultimately affects the organization. And particularly, I'm thinking about higher education overall. And so as I began to learn about mindfulness in my journey, I started with the definition from Jon Kabat-Zinn of paying attention on purpose, right, non-judgmentally, and in the present moment. But what I began to explore and understand is that there are so many ways to have this practice of contemplation through many activities. And so, I talk about my experience with breathing techniques, meditation, yoga, Tai Chi, and journaling. And so the turning point, one of the turning points that I talk about in the chapter is being in Dr. Wong's class, Curriculum for Nonviolence. And it really helped with that growth and transformation. It helped me to be more responsive and reflective of myself and to be less reactive. So what I recognized when we actually had that formal practice in class before we started class was to do it together with people was great, and to talk about that experience. But then journaling allowed me to recognize how much more compassion I needed to give to myself. So through journaling, I recognized that I could take more space. And actually, Dr. Wong, I remember this, we were talking and you were like, Chez, you have a lot going on there, and so I noticed this in your reflection. And so how has that experience helped you? And so mindfulness through that journey has allowed me to explore not only my initial experience with it, which was the mindfulness-based stress reduction techniques through Palouse Mindfulness, which is an online practice that you can find online, but also being able to experience things on my campus at UCO. I connected with a faculty member where I got to experience Tai Chi. And Tai Chi is a mindful movement that not only did I learn forms and had a sense of embodiment after doing these practices where I felt a little more aware, going through the day, being busy, we would take this time to do Tai Chi, and you would just notice in the class after we've done these practices, maybe done some box breathing, that the environment just kind of chilled out. And so, noticing those types of things, connecting with faculty who were also doing those practices really helped to stay connected with mindfulness. Because again, talking about how fast-paced things are, the more I found that I did it with others, the more that I taught it, the more my practice continued to sustain. And then not only did it help me, but then when I interacted with students and with my coworkers and with my colleagues, I was more intentional about how I engaged with them. And so I originally thought I was learning mindfulness to help a tool for students, but it helped me be better and helped me pour into my own cup so that I could share with others. And so also in the chapter, you'll find that there are key strategies. A formal practice does not have to take an hour, although it can, and that's very helpful, but intentional 3 to 5 minute breaks away from the screen. I talk about using the breath as an anchor, box breathing, where we hold the breath for a count of 4, we inhale, we exhale, and just kind of recognizing where we are before the practice and after the practice not only helps me, but helps when we do these mindful meditations or movements, things like that. And then I also learned that trying different types of contemplative practices helped me to explore what works for me, because what works for me doesn't necessarily work for others. And just trying new things are great. And so as I connected through teaching, through the practice myself, through talking about it with others, it has just been a part of my personal journey, through part of my higher education journey, and connections like these where I get to continue to talk about it, to hear all of these great stories and remember how much of a teaching experience that it just keeps me in it. So that's what my chapter is about. It's a gift of becoming more present and having compassion, more compassion for others and also for myself.
All right. Thank you so much. Next, we'll hear from Kim Skarns.
Yeah, thanks, Chez. I was like remembering when you had attended one of my classes and we did breathing to open up the class, and I was like, okay, some mindful breath right now. So I live just west of Springfield, Missouri, and I recently moved here in 2022 or 2023 from Colorado, and so that was a big change. And in order to adjust to that movement, this assignment came up in our nonviolent curriculum class about having a nature companion, which then became this chapter. And so I chose the farm that I had moved to as our family farm. It's 18 acres, and it's the first time that we have lived in a more rural environment where you have to drive 10 to 20 minutes to get to a store or something like that. I hadn't experienced that before, and I had always wanted it, and this was our opportunity. And so to get to know the farm and my new living place, the nature companion that I wrote about was the family farm where we had moved to, or still are right now, presently. And I worked a little bit from Tim Ingold's framework of engaging with rather than an of. And so having with that companion in a togetherness sort of orientation, the farm was no longer meant to be just an object or place that was an other, but I was trying to come together with it in connective points. And ways that I did that, I started walking daily and just seeing where I ended up. There were some trails that were already sort of made by the cows or just by nature. And then there were other trails that I was like, what if I tried to clear this out here? This would be a really nice space. And so I also took time to notice just the movement and the life around me on the farm. So a lot more birds. And, the further I got into my 30s, I realized that's something that people in their 30s are doing is bird watching now. It's like our whole thing. I was like, all right, cool. I'm with people like me watching these birds now. It's like where we are orienting to. I can see them right now as I'm speaking. And filling the bird feeders, making sure that the bird bath had water in it, and watching them, just watching them, the different colors of them, the different patterns, and how some travel in flocks and some are by themselves. And started noticing them. I noticed our neighboring cows, and I also paid more attention to the shifting weather and seasons. It's a lot windier here than I'm used to, and the seasons had some extremes that I should be used to, but I wasn't. And so it was like, I didn't miss humidity, and just relearning that in a different natural context, especially being responsible for chickens here. How do I keep them alive in heat? How do I keep them, alive in the cold? I know Chelsea knows about the chickens. And just, understanding more about how I can connect to them in this space. And I started trying to also intentionally orient from a position of openness and appreciation and gratitude for those moments. And just being on the farm and with the farm was starting to be a peaceful break from pursuing a doctorate and living in a new place where we didn't know a lot of people yet and just figuring out who am I here. I could still connect to who I am here, with the farm and in that relationship. So I started considering also Nagler's definition of nonviolence as an active force for goodness, orienting from love. And I said, okay, like if I'm going out and projecting this love onto the farm and to the tree right outside my window, what is that going to feel like for me? And I was journaling about that. Um, I was respecting the life around me. I was trying not to kill the bugs and the rodents or anything like that. If they were in my house, I was trying to capture them and put them back in the field because the field had been here so much longer than I had been. And I was invading upon their home, not them invading upon mine. And just having that felt really good. Even if it was a wasp, I was like, can you please leave? Can you please, can you go somewhere else? Can you not be right near me right now? Shooing it away and trying not to kill it. Just because I knew that this was part of the farm and part of living here, and I wanted to be part of that experience. Uh, and just, I don't know, respecting that and appreciating their movement. I noticed so many frogs on the windows and I could see their little just hands and it was so neat and how fast a turtle can actually journey across a field was so amazing to me. It was the first time I had actually noticed and slowed down enough to notice. And I was mowing and I saw movement and it was a wolf spider. And I could see it from where I was because they were that big. And it was again just things that I had been attending to now intentionally that I hadn't before. And so in doing that, I started to sort of flow more with the rhythm of the farm around me. And I, again, as a PhD student or candidate or whatever, maybe some of you can relate as doctoral people, just being kind of type A and having control and needing structure. That's something I think a lot of us orient toward in our lives, or we wouldn't be able to be successful in this kind of a program. But I tried to let go a little bit of that control and tried to flow more with what was happening around me and not trying to say, today I'm gonna see a this or today I'm gonna hear a that, and just letting it be. And I found a lot of presence and grounding in that really helped me orient, I think, a little more into the nonviolence with self that I was seeking. Uh, I didn't like what I discovered about death here. I did experience some deaths of chickens to predators or weather, or some of the birds. The farm cat would get them, and I'd find a little bird body, and I felt really bad about it. And but I learned a little bit more about the balance between life and death, and how grief and joy interplay, and really show a life experience as having to have both. And so even that was orienting. It was a very different perspective that I hadn't had before, intentionally sitting with the farm and trying to be with him and be with this puppy who doesn't know what he's barking at in the background. I apologize. It helped me also as an educator because in finding ways to ground more in my everyday life in this environment, I felt like I had more openness toward listening with my students. I had always been connective with them and relational with them, but I felt like I could create a space for them to feel and flow with feelings and emotions and thoughts without having to feel like, well, we better get back on task. It was just sort of like, well, let's just be here and see where you take this, and giving them a little more agency in that. I felt more empowered to respond rather than react, which I learned the difference of. And understanding how to do that with conflicts and anxieties that are outside of me and feeling comfortable in that space, and trying to just model that active force that I feel is nonviolence with just an empowerment that I guess I didn't feel confident in before I had taken time with the farm. And it really all started there with just this assignment of, well, it could be nice to get to know the land around me, and then really feel that transformation in myself with being with the land around me. And so think there's a lot of terminology in there with, being with and nature companions and stuff like, and it's just become part of my everyday now because I try to tell people about it more and help them connect it to what nonviolence is, not as it's not passive, it's very active, and look at what it's done for me. And, um, being a little commercial for it, but that was sort of how, my chapter ended up forming, is just, some journal entries, that I brought in to discuss that, and just grappling with those new understandings through that lens of, this is what it felt like when it was just Kim feeling it, compared to, well, this is how Kim's feeling it, like while sitting under this tree, or while walking on this path, or while looking at this bird. And it just gave a little bit more of a connected sense that I still lean into now as I'm here. I was just watching the tree bud over the past 4 weeks. It was started with nothing, and then I was like, "Ooh, the little green buds are coming," and now they're full out leaves, and I've been noticing it and commenting on it, and I'm like, "Oh, look, there's more today," and "Oh, it's a different round of birds today. Now it's all the little blackbirds with the blue on them," and just seeing it in ways that I hadn't before. And so, yeah, so that's what I wrote about, is just getting to know my new home and, relating to it. And I feel like any kind of a move is going to change you a little bit, but I felt that reciprocity, in how we're changing each other and transforming with one another. And so, yeah, so that was what my chapter was about.
All right, thank you. And our final presenter will be Dr. Chelsea Walters.
Thank you. And thank you for that, Kim. You put me in such a Zen space because for those who know me, I am a super rural nerd. My whole life revolves around my garden and my chickens. So as she was saying that, I'm like, oh, I wonder if any of my new little seedlings have sprouted. And you might actually be able to hear some little baby chicks. Because I have a brooder in my office, like you do when you live in a rural area. So thank you again for that. That really put me in just a great place. Again, thanks for letting me speak. I'm Chelsea Walters, and my chapter is a Currere on unlearning the rules. And when I began this chapter, I really had no idea, one, that it would be a chapter, and two, that I had no idea I was going on a journey of nonviolence. That was not my intention. I just kind of dove in. I knew my assignment was I had to do a Currere, and I knew that I needed to explore my own educational history. And I really had no idea where I was going or how I was going to get there, but I do love to write. I am an English professor, and I'm just kind of a chatterbox by nature. So I was happy to channel that energy into paper and just, get all those feelings and that history out there. And so, the assignment was simple: write a query about your educational experience. And so I did. And just for those of you who aren't familiar, the stages of that are, first you do a regressive writing experience. And that's where you write about your past in a focused way. And my focus, again, was my own personal educational history. And you write about your past in a focused way without judgment. You're not trying to analyze it or make meaning of it. You just want to get it out on paper. And you do that for a period of time before you move on to the progressive, where you write about yourself in an imagined future. And again, you do that in a way that's not without judgment. Like, you don't put judgment upon yourself. You don't try to analyze what it means. You just have this imagined future. And then in your third phase, you go back and analyze your writing and try to find out what came about from that. What do you mean by that? How did that get into your writing? What themes do you see? And then you synthesize all of that information. And because I had no clear path, I really didn't know what I was going to find. And I was really quite surprised with where I ended up. As I was analyzing, I realized most of my analysis and most of my stories really centered around a lot of guilt and a lot of shame. I grew up in a very conservative Southern Baptist evangelical Christian household, where I was expected to follow certain rules. And those rules included being submissive, being quiet, making sure that I was submitting constantly. And that is contrary to my very nature. So it was very difficult for me to do that, quite frankly. And so as I was reading through my history, I was realizing that all of my memories here are just so embedded in guilt and shame about how I was not who I was told and who I thought I was supposed to be, this quiet, demure, submissive girl. And so a lot of when I would go back, I realized everything that revolved around my education, around me learning and my curiosity and wanting to know more was viewed through the lens of guilt. Like asking questions was sinful, or pushing the boundaries was shameful. And so it was very interesting as somebody exploring this in her doctoral program to feel a sense of shame of wanting to know more and to learn and to expose that curiosity. And so I was like, well, why do I feel this way? And what is my progressive? Well, my progressive was in every single one of my progressives, I was imagining myself in a garden with my children on my land, teaching them like beautiful experiences where we were learning without shame. And in looking through this analysis and looking through this synthesis and synthesizing all of these ideas, realized there were a few ways that I kind of had pieced together my story. And that was one, I had to figure out what rules I had identified in my life. So in the section called Identifying the Rules, that's where I really was surprised to just find the role of religion and how I had let it influence the way I view learning. The rules that Southern Baptist women had to follow. And that those rules didn't necessarily match up with the Bible that I believed growing up. And so how I felt some tension there. And then I moved into the next phase of, okay, once I knew what the rules were, I had to, in my youth, in my childhood, I had to learn the rules. I knew that I had to listen. I knew not to ask questions. I knew I had to submit to authority. I knew that I had to, submit to the men and the head of the household, to have faith like a child. And specifically that meant not asking questions or pushing back, and to make sure that my social mask was a socially acceptable portrayal of what a woman should be. And so in looking back and looking through my memories of me learning the rules, I realized there was this sort of era where I followed the rules. Not sort of, there was a long era. It was a good portion of my life where I learned the rules and then I followed them. And that was very much those children are to be seen and not heard era. And I had a lot of guilt following the rules because I didn't follow them well. I was constantly breaking the rules accidentally. And I tried really hard to follow them. And it just was very contrary to my nature. I'm a very free spirit. I talk too much. I ask too many questions. I was just too much. And so there was that guilt and shame that kept resurfacing with any time I was seeking more information or seeking clarity or seeking information or seeking any kind of knowledge, really. Circling back to, the apple and in the Garden of Eden, it was all, knowledge was very much a sense of guilt and shame for me. So it was just beautifully ironic that I chose my peace in planting my own garden. But we're sowing new seeds. So I did eventually, in like most people, my early 20s, that's when I started breaking the rules in the form of rebellion. I questioned. I did ultimately refuse religion, go back to religion, refuse it again, and then wind up in a sort of middle ground. But it was finally in allowing myself to ask questions that I became okay with not knowing how I fit into that. And that realization, once I was going through this Currere, made me realize that this was my nonviolent journey that I did not even know I was on. I didn't even know that I had to ask questions and sort of break the rules to let it be okay for me to continue on this academic journey. And even still, I live in a very conservative area. I live in a town so small, we don't have a stoplight. Our town actually joins the neighboring town for a school. And so I do have to tiptoe around the rules. And that's kind of intertwined with me unlearning the rules and unlearning that guilt and that shame. But I am so grateful to say that this nonviolence journey has been both helpful for me and my husband as we've kind of unlearned this way of life. And our children are inquisitive and have gone through their own. I mean, my oldest is only 10, but has gone through his own beautiful, weird little religious journey where he's questioned things and asked if certain things mean what they mean, and we have a very open dialogue about questioning and learning and being curious in our household, and a lot of that is thanks to being able to go on a journey I didn't even know I needed. So if you have not engaged in a Currere, I do highly recommend it. It is a beautiful journey of nonviolence. It really kind of led me to my own lifelong journey that I didn't know I needed. So thank you again for allowing me to share.
Great. Thank you, Chelsea, and all of our presenters for sharing about your wonderful work. At this time, we would like to open it up for comments, questions, either from our panelists or others. You could type a question or comment in the chat or just unmute and ask. Do we have any questions or comments for any of our panelists? I know I have a few, so maybe I'll start off here. Actually, Chelsea, I was going to ask you. I was really just struck in rereading your piece this week by these really vivid and beautiful metaphors and symbols that emerged right as you described kind of your process and your kind of orientation to Currere. So you have this metaphor of the process of education as you write a tangled clump of antique jewelry, right, long forgotten and pushed to the back of a hand-painted jewelry box. Untangling the way I view learning, life, and myself must happen as I find new information to place in the box. And then you also talk about the meditative powers of gardening that you discovered, right? This kind of symbol of gardening. So can you share a little bit about these metaphors and symbols and how they emerged from the process, or if they did? I'm assuming they did, but
yes, thank you. So my house, we speak in analogies. Everything we do has to be equated to something else. And I think during the time of me writing this, I was actually actively watching my husband untangle my jewelry. And I was like, oh my goodness, that's such an apt metaphor for this current experience. But we are a household full of neurodivergent people. And so trying to relate and relay information to one another and trying to raise our children to understand and relate to the outside world, we speak in a lot of metaphors and a lot of analogies. And I think I was a little entranced by his process of untangling my jewelry because, one, it was so sweet because he was doing it so kindly, so patiently. If you know my husband, he's very stoic, very patient, a man of few words, which is why he married a chatterbox, right? And he was not upset. He was just so patient. But then one would get into another knot and I would get frustrated and I would be like, I can't do this, and he would be like, you just have to, that you just follow the knots and untangle them. And it was actually an experience that happened while I was writing the chapter.
Excellent. Thank you. Samantha, I wanted to ask you if you could talk a little bit more about how you see possibilities for kind of I guess maybe place-based education in our educational system, or possibilities for reimagining our educational system with experiential or place-based learning?
Yeah, sure. I know for myself, it's an opportunity to slow down and to really engage in what I'm doing and think beyond just curriculum, just beyond what's expected. Um, I think I think when we take kids on field trips, it's let's do this and what did you learn about this and let's go here and what like it's just very fast paced and a high expectation to produce something or to regurgitate something that you've learned. But I think that taking the time to slow down and engage where you are, um, and a lot of times it's nature. I was very engaged in the nature of the places that I went, and it was easy to engage in the nature there because there was nothing there. But and you kind of had to dig a little bit for what was there or what stories missing or what you're trying to gather from the absence. So I think that it, education today is all about producing something or earning something or achieving something. And I think we do a disservice to ourselves and our children by rushing through everything. And I think we have to be intentional to slow down and engage with what's around us. And so that was what I chose to do then. And I was really searching for something. But I don't think I knew what I was searching for until it was over. Um, so you just kind of have to teach or offer that opportunity to search for what you don't know you're looking for too. But I think it's all about slowing down and engaging with what's around you and not trying to worry about the next thing or produce something or achieve an expectation. Does that answer your question?
It does, yes. Thank you. Thank you. And we have about 5 more minutes.
I did have a thought. I think it's so fascinating that so many people said that they didn't know where they were going when they started out their journeys, which really speaks to your message, Samantha, about allowing time and energy just to explore our own educational experiences.
Kim, I liked what you said about kind of having more orientation out of this experience from listening to students and responding rather than reacting. I just wanted to ask, how do you see like natural or outdoor spaces and you use this beautiful term, nature companions, as beyond that kind of as part of our educational system, place-based learning? I mean, you talked a little bit, about how you incorporate it in your own teaching, but kind of other ways you have done that or can do that, or how can we incorporate nature companions in our system?
Yeah, I would love to see it more because so many of our schools are windowless or, we've got all the fluorescent lighting, not the natural lighting. And so, just revamping the entire education system so everyone gets natural light would be a start, but, we'll build up to it. No, when I had the permission from administration, I like to try to take them outside to do some writing because I taught English. And so we'd sit out like with paper and pencil, not with our Chromebooks or anything. Like we would actually like physically, viscerally write and try to experience just like observing around us. Even when I was in an urban area, we still had grass. There were still bugs and flowers and the sky and things to look at. And so I tried to tie that to state standards about writing poetry and creative writing. And so where there's a will, there's a way. Uh,
Yeah.
so, and they loved it. They liked, I think, being able to, like, I found, especially my squirrely 7th graders, they were a lot happier when I was like, you can get some fresh air as long as you're not like running all around right now. Like, we have to focus on what we're doing, but maybe we will just like take a little walk to see what we observe. And even just being out of the classroom and just in an outdoor space was, again, I use the word grounding, but it's real. It's a real thing to remember where we're at and not just be like in the same classroom that looks the same as all the other classrooms, in a building that's concrete and just cut off. So when we had opportunities to do that, I would do that. Or if I got to pick my classroom at the community college, I was like, where are the ones with windows? I want ones with windows, so, but again, you have to earn your way into that. But I just thought everyone was a lot more focused when they could just look out the window a little bit and just see something even to help them think. And so I definitely advocate for that where it's possible.
Thank you. And just one more question, unless anybody wants to jump in, feel free. But I wanted to ask Vanessa, can you tell us a little bit more about how, this idea of transformation extends to your professional or educational environment, like at Holland Hall? I know you've done a lot with nonviolence education and in your professional work. So can you talk about that for just a minute?
Sure thing. I will be brief because I know our time is running very short. One of the things that, like everyone else this evening, I did not really even understand nonviolence, and it was this magical term that lived there. I wrote a dissertation on nonviolence, and I think I know so much more about it a year and a half later from that experience. And even when I was writing a dissertation, it's just this ever evolving, ever growing, ever changing process. One of the things that it's really helped me in school is just to enter into conversations with families, with parents, just from a different space of seeing them as we're not always seeing eye to eye on everything, but just having this appreciation for their side of the story, their perspective, what are they bringing to this situation that is causing them to be this so upset about whatever the topic is. And I just practicing the principles of nonviolence and just really recognizing the other side as this person and this human being has really helped facilitate a lot of conversations. And most of the time, things can be dissolved and it's just we all come to a really good resolution where both sides feel satisfaction and respect with each other. So I think that would be the best way to describe that.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone again for being here and sharing with us about your wonderful work. The recording of our conversations will be uploaded to Dr. Wong's Nonviolence YouTube channel. As she mentioned earlier, I just posted the link in the chat, so you can access it later. Dr. Wong, do you have anything else before we're almost at the magic 60-minute mark? So thank you again to our panelists for sharing your work and to our guests for logging on and joining us.